Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, How to Get It Just Right. Thank you so much for joining us for another wonderful conversation that is going to be uplifting and truly, truly impactful. As we go through the holiday seasons and as we look forward to what lies ahead, as much as there's going to be family time and gatherings and celebrations, it's unavoidable that the stress comes along with it. For various reasons, in so many different ways, stress shows up. And today we're going to be talking about how do we identify that, how do we manage it, and how do we work through it in a way that we don't break and we don't break others, and how do we make these moments matter and count and grow through it and grow from it. To have this wonderfully impactful conversation is Janet Barrett, joining us all the way from the Boston area. Janet, welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today and to talk to you about this because you're right, it is such an important topic.
Thank you, Janet. You focus on resiliency and emotional intelligence and giving people the opportunity to rise above sometimes their history, sometimes their circumstances, all of it, right? So talk to us about how you got to this place. It's not something we go to school to do. We find ourselves in this place invariably. How did you find yourself coming to this place?
So a few years ago, I found myself in what I think of as kind of the second stage of my adult life. So the first stage was what I think pretty much everybody does. They finish up with whatever school or education they have, and they get their first real job. And I did that just like everybody else. I became a management consultant. I specialized in SKU optimization, which is basically a fancy way of saying figuring out what to sell and how much to sell. And I was actually pretty good at it. I lived and worked all over the world, helping retailers and apparel manufacturers with their processes. And as I was going through that, I kind of quickly figured out that I wasn't actually really making a new process for them. What I was doing was changing what they had previously done. And so if I wanted my project to be successful, I actually had to focus on the individuals making the change and help them understand why they should make it. Because quite frankly, nobody wants to make change. And so I became very focused on a process called change management, which just helps people make change effectively with less stress. And I was living in Japan and I was in my 30s and I ended up meeting somebody and we got married. And then we had 4 kids in 3 years and 3 months, which, yes, it can be a lot. The way that we did it was we had 2 singletons and then we had twins. And that's what pushed me into that second stage of my adult life that I mentioned before. And I became a stay-at-home parent. And some people do it, some people don't. There's lots of different paths that you can take, but that was the path that I took. And I ended up using a lot of those skills from my corporate life in my personal life, both with my kids and my community, because we moved, I think, 6 times in 7.5 years. And so that's a lot of change for my kids. And I had to help them adjust and adapt to whatever new environment they were in. And I found people kept telling me over and over again how impressed they were with how well my kids adapted to all of this change, that it didn't really seem to bother them. And I also did it in my community. I volunteer a lot, and there's always change that needs to happen. And I kind of became that point person for it. And then one day I found out that my husband was having an affair and he wanted a divorce. And that's a lot of change. And I couldn't handle it. It completely broke me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I lost 40 pounds in 5 weeks. I'm 5'6" and I was under 100 pounds. And I couldn't figure out why, because I had spent 30 years of my life helping people make change, and I couldn't help myself. And so I did what I always did. And I was like, okay, I can't keep going like this. I have got to figure this out. And I started researching. And I was really researching to save my own life because I couldn't keep going. And what it ended up turning into was several years of research. I ended up getting a master's degree in organizational psychology. And then I ended up writing a thesis about how can we help other people? How can we help people be proactive in their mental health? And what I realized is that basically what I was researching and writing about was educating people about resilience and how they can learn what real resilience is. And I've found that sometimes people actually feel like resilience is a bad word. They're so sick of hearing you have to be resilient to get through all of the tough times in life. And what it is that when people hear that, what they're hearing is only half of what resilience actually is. They're hearing the part where you have to get through the tough time, but they don't hear about, okay, now that you've done whatever you need to get through, how do you really recover and get back in balance? So as we're going through life, I find people, and I was the same way, and it's what ended up breaking me in the end, was I had gone through that 30 years of so much change and taking it on and plowing through using grit, determination, willpower, whatever it might be. And I finally got through all of it, but I never actually took the time to then say, okay, how do I recover? How do I restore myself? And because I never did that, that last thing, the divorce, that's what broke me. It was I simply couldn't take one more thing. And that's what a lot of people find themselves going through every day is it might be little things that just build up as you go through your day. And you get to the end of the day and you've had 500 emails, a whole bunch of people calling you. You have all of these demands, financials are changing, environment is changing, and you get home and you walk in and there's dishes everywhere. And you just yell at your kids, why can't you put the dishes away? But you're not really that upset about the dishes. You have broken because you've had too much stuff pile up throughout the day and you never took the time to simply set it down. And that's like a little break that you might go through. I went through many of those little breaks throughout my life, didn't recognize that's what was happening. And it wasn't until I hit that big break of the divorce that I realized that's not what we have to do. That's not how we have to go through life.
That is very sad to hear. And I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that with the audience because that also makes this conversation that much more powerful.
Thank you.
A couple of questions coming up for me. The scenario you're painting, a lot of women go through. Even women who are career-minded, when they get married, they are the ones having the kids. They are the ones who have to make the change. And they are the ones invariably making the sacrifice, whether it's for childbirth and raising children or caregiving at a later stage in life. Women give up everything. And when you find yourself in a place where after giving up everything, the other person, it's not enough, whether it's a divorce or a death of a spouse you're giving care for, it's a complete end, right? Mm-hmm. You and I relate to this. You're talking about divorce. I'm talking about caregiving for a husband who's ailing and having to give up everything that I had built to make his caregiving primary. So we women, without thinking twice about it, we naturally, as nurturers, do this, right? We know instinctively that's right. But you're right. We don't fill our cups enough and prevent ourselves from breaking. And those of us who are lucky and who've invested in girlfriends will always have the sisterhood around us reminding us. So talk to us about what were some of the things you learned you had to do to put in place so that breaking at that end of that experience is preventable?
So first, thank you for recognizing the vulnerability, because I firmly believe that stories are so much more powerful than statistics. And so I share my story because I want other people to know that they're not alone. And while their story might not exactly mirror mine, that we all end up going through things and we don't necessarily know what anyone else is going through. And to try and give them grace in whatever environment you find them in. But to answer your question about what did I learn about what we need to do, I found that there's a lot of things that are misconceptions out there. And so I want to start there and talk about what this isn't, and then talk about what I learned it actually is. So I hear a lot of people talk about that you need to do this self-care in order to restore yourself. And I think that's a great thing to do. If you enjoy, taking a walk, getting a massage, going out to lunch with someone, all of those are really great things to like give you some time. But those are the things that aren't really going to let you set down the emotional weight that you may be carrying. So it has to involve those emotions and setting them down. And to your point about if you have a really great tribe around you, a social network that supports you, that you can actually be vulnerable and share your true story with them, that is one of the absolute best ways to be able to do that and really start the recovery, because it's talking about it and putting light on what you're going through that actually helps set some of it down and let you realize that it's not necessarily that dark and heavy when you start talking about it and sharing it. However, what I find is very few people really have that true open vulnerability with any other individual, especially long term. I talk to a lot of people that are in long-term marital relationships, and they actually started more vulnerable with the individual that they're in that relationship, and they have lost some of their ability to share their life with those individuals just because they're scared of the reaction, or they don't want to really admit to them what they're feeling because they are worried it will hurt them in some way, shape, or form. So if you have that, it's amazing. But if you don't, and honestly, I did not have that social network out there. I do now, but when I broke, I realized there was so much that I didn't share about my life with anyone. So for those that don't, you still need to somehow express it. And so if you can find a therapist, that's great. But if not, I encourage everyone to journal. And not just journal what happened to you today, but to journal and go back and look at those major life events and start writing about them and putting them down. And then to take the next step, which is to think about what are the emotions that actually triggers in you? What is it that you're actually feeling? Because from a very young age, we are taught to suppress so many of our natural reactions. And I give an example to some people, and a trigger warning because it is talking about death. I was at a funeral of a friend of mine, a 52-year-old gentleman. He passed away very unexpectedly. He left a wife and he left two children, a 13-year-old daughter and a son that turned 10 the day after his father's funeral. And both of those kids got up at his funeral and spoke about him very eloquently, and they kept it together. And afterward, in the receiving line, there were several hundred people there. It's a very tight community around them. And everyone went through the receiving line and complimented the kids about how they were able to get up and speak about their dad passing and not cry. And I sat and watched it and realized that several hundred people just told these kids, you did a good job not crying at one of the saddest points in your life. And we do that time and time again with our children. If they get mad at something, we say, oh, we get what we get and we don't get upset. We don't teach them, how should you react? We just say, keep it in, contain that, suppress that. And so when you get later in life, most people have absolutely no idea that they're even feeling it. So identifying the emotion is very critical. And then we need to teach people, how do you express it? Because quite frankly, I didn't express anger for 50 years. And I didn't realize how much anger I had built up inside me. And so I used research by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a very famous book. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now. The Body Keeps the Score. Sorry, he wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And he did research on veterans with PTSD and how he recognized that they had basically trapped their natural reactions in their body and they needed to learn to express them. And so that's what I talk about with a lot of people is you need to learn to safely express those emotions because talking about them is really helpful. But if you have it trapped inside your body as well, you need to learn to get it out, but do it in a safe way. And that's the key, is that safe release of your emotions.
Mm-hmm. And that totally resonates for me. Our audience know this. I grew up in the middle of a genocidal war. And fear and anger and hate were the three emotions that was constantly around me. And my refuge was writing. I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I was multilingual, so I wrote in multiple languages. And I also found that releasing it in different ways and different languages also helped me. It was like talking to different people because I'm using different mediums. We didn't have anything called therapy or psychologists or none of that, right? To this day, it's something that we each had to figure out a way to deal with in our own way. And the adults were not present because they were all in the middle of the war. And children had to figure this out for themselves. And fast forward today, we are living in a world where parents are too busy making a living to put a roof over the heads of the children and put food on the plate and have health insurance and save money for college. And there's so much burden on parents that they are not emotionally available for their children. And they themselves have not mastered how to release it safely. And everything we are seeing, I feel like we are coming towards a perfect tsunami because the millennials and Gen Zs and then the generation coming after them. How are we going to give coping mechanisms? And some people say these are first world problems because third world children have different ways of dealing with it. But first world problems are the entire world's problems. Third world problems are not everybody's problems, but first world problems are everybody's problems.
Yeah.
What advice would you have, having gone through this journey for yourself and having been a mother in that process of going through it? What advice would you have for parents, mothers and fathers, on how best to manage through it for themselves, but at the same time, through the lived experience, passing on something far more valuable to their children?
So I think the first thing is to encourage people to recognize that it is a natural expression. Our body has a very natural expression. And when you deal with children, you see that reaction. So if you have a kid that gets mad, their first thing is to stomp their feet and to, bang their arms, to do something to physically let it out and recognize that's natural. that is okay. You need to tell them, maybe not in the moment. And the same thing goes for adults. We've already learned not to do it in the moment. But because we've learned to not do that, we've also learned to just not even accept that we have it. So first we need to have that recognition. So I love that concept that you just talked about of writing in multiple languages. That is such an absolute gift that you just gave me, because I've never thought of that as being a really great way to release it in multiple ways, because different languages actually process and express emotions in very unique ways. And I love that ability. I wish everyone had that. So thank you for that. If you have the ability to write it down in multiple languages, do, and then look and see if there's like differences that come at you, but recognize this is the emotion that I'm putting out there. And then try and actually feel it in your body. So for us adults that we've gone through this, we have a really hard time letting our bodies feel that physical sensation, because we know we can't do that. We've been taught, even if you think about in third world countries, the stress that they're under, those kids, they have to learn, I can't show that emotion because I'm going to, cause some problem. There's going to be an issue with it. And so they also learn to do that, because if they do, nothing good is going to come from it. So recognize it, try to actually feel it, and then learn, what is it your body wants to do? So for me, my emotions tend to be very big in their physical expression in my body. If you're looking at this on video as opposed to listening to it, you'll see my hands go. Like everything about me when I'm doing an emotion comes out large. And so I need a big physical expression of those emotions, whether it is happiness, whether it's excitement, if it's sadness or anger. And the one that I feel everyone really struggles with the most are sadness and anger. And anger for me, the way that I get mine out is I find, for big ones, I find the time to go and use my punching bag. But it's not just punching the bag, because that's just exercise. It's actually thinking about whatever's making me angry, feel it in my body, and then start punching. And it lets my body actually release it. And there's a million ways that that can be done. But I've taught all of my kids, when you start having those emotions, you can't maybe in the minute that it's happening actually express them, but make sure later you go back and let it out in whatever way works for you. And even if it's a small annoyance, you still need to let that go. And there is one universal way to let those small annoyances go. And you can even see it in the animal kingdom. And I give the example of road rage, which is any place that there is driving or vehicular traffic, everybody ends up having road rage, road aggression. And as you're going through and something's bothering you, obviously in the minute, you can't ram the car next to you or take out the bike or whatever it is. You have to keep it together for everyone's safety. But you get to the end of wherever you're driving, you put your car in park, and you simply think about what it was that annoyed you. They cut you off. They didn't go fast enough. They went too fast, whatever it is. Think about it, feel the annoyance, and then go, ah. And you actually can release that stress. And we've scientifically proven that your cortisol, the hormone that causes stress or that comes from stress, goes down, and your endorphins increase. And if you take that 30, like not even 30 seconds, 3 seconds to release that stress, it will actually allow you to go into your day in a much happier way. And that is one of the key things that you can give kids, because usually their stresses are little. And if you can teach them that once it's over, to just kind of go to the side, go to a safe place and let it out, they'll start laughing and they'll come back in and re-engage with everybody in a much happier way.
Mm-hmm. So as you're talking, I'm smiling because I grew up with a German Shepherd in Sri Lanka. And the dog's way of dealing with stress is he'll just howl. And I learned very young when there's so much stress around me, the dog was my buddy. So we would both just howl. And to this
Mhm.
day, for me, the best way to relieve stress, I grew up by the beach. We can just run to the beach and just scream, right? And the open space just absorbs everything. And that
Mhm.
screaming is truly cathartic because it just drains all the stress. I actually feel the stress oozing out of my body. And then it's like total relief. So as I went through my husband's cancer, as I am dealing with his Lewy body dementia and working through his struggles, it's one of the things I still continue to do. I tell my husband, I'm going to scream. Don't get stressed out because this is how I am going to relieve my stress. Feel free to come with me. Let's scream together. Right.
Yes.
And it's a nice, fun way to do this. At the same time, we know we're not mad at each other, but we're releasing it.
Mhm. Yes.
So the question that comes up for me as we are talking through this, you have a book behind you and it's
Yes.
saying stop the break. So can you talk to us a little bit about the book and the message there?
Yes. So the name is Stop the Break. And it's the book that I wrote actually as an expansion of my thesis. So it's talking about how can we actually stop people from having those little breaks where at the end of the day you're yelling at your kids, and how can we stop the big breaks like I had after my divorce. And it gives it tells my story, because again, I think stories are so much more powerful than statistics. And then it talks about the process for what you can do if you find yourself in that situation. What can you do to help yourself stop breaking? And then it also talks about what can we do as a society, because I think one of the main issues in society right now is simply the stigma around admitting you need help. And to your point, if you have those that social network that supports you and you can talk to them, that is amazing. But so many people don't, because they are so worried about being honest about what's going on in their life and the stress that they're dealing with, that they don't ever tell anyone. And so my whole thing is we need to stop people from breaking, and we need to slay the stigma around mental health and allow people to fully express themselves in safe and productive ways, and recognize that everybody's going through things. And one of the actual therapies that I recommend in how you express is the scream or yelling therapy, which works for so many people. You know, some people it's physical. I happen to be a physical, you're a verbal. There's some people that get their stress and their anxiety out using art, and they have to create something and do it that way, and they just put it all out there, whether it is, you know, making something in a 3D form, or if it happens to be a 2D form, or to your point, even just writing. So that is my book.
Beautiful. I am so happy we're having this conversation because even the ones who look happy and life is beautiful for them, everybody is struggling with something.
Mhm.
And appearance is so important in our society that we break because we're so busy pretending while real life is crumbling inside. And I would
Yes.
love for our audience to be able to reach you, talk to you, get in touch with you for whatever they want to have this follow up to be. What is the best way for them to reach you?
So if you go to my website, which is just janet-barrett.com, Janet-B as in boy, ARRETT.com. All of my socials are there. You can follow me on any of those. And if any of your listeners go out there, there is a place to register to win a free signed copy of Stop the Break. I give away 2 books every month. So if you go out and register, sign up, maybe you will win a copy. And I always encourage people that if they do get a copy of my book or anybody else's book, when you're done, to share it with someone else. Because the more people we can help, the more breaks we can stop from happening. And then our society in general will become healthier and happier.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Janet. I want to open this up for conversation with our live audience. And I know Robin, with her positive psychology background and the amazing work she does in resilience and being humane, she's going to have something to add here.
Oh, it has been a thrill listening to you. And for better or worse, I can relate to almost every aspect that you have shared. Were you able to find a group to be able to share honestly, or did you just do it like through therapy, which I think is fabulous, by the way? Therapy is fabulous.
So the way that I ended up being able to find kind of my tribe, I did use therapy, and I found that that helped. So when I found out that we were getting divorced, we made a choice to not tell anyone for several months for various reasons. And so I kept it inside. And a lot of other things outside of that were going on, including needing to sell my house. And my best friend happened to be my realtor. And I hadn't even told her what was going on. And we were driving one day, and I finally just couldn't take it anymore. And I just broke down and told her absolutely everything. And the feeling of relief after having done that was so dramatic that I continued to do that with her and with other people. And what I found once I did it was that basically those people either responded and continued to want to be in that vulnerable state with me, or they didn't. And when they didn't, I realized that's not the people that I needed to stay with. And it has been so eye-opening and life-changing, because once I realized that difference, and again, I was 50 when this happened, so it's not like I hadn't been through part of life. I was well along my way in life, and I had not really ever been able to be truly vulnerable with somebody outside of my husband at the time. And once I did, and I started being able to really recognize the signs of people that wanted to be in my vulnerable state with me, I started attracting more of them. And now I have a very great community of individuals that I have surrounded myself with. I actually don't do therapy anymore. I continue to write, and I use that. And then I use my social network as my individual therapist. I've also been very fortunate that because I think I have opened myself up to that, I have joined a couple of online social networks of people that we've just kind of connected and created these new spaces. One of them is a group called Catalyst that is pretty new and was created by a woman who lost her husband. And she also realized, she's like, I didn't have a place to be vulnerable and feel like I could really talk about everything with anyone. And so when she brings women in, she interviews them looking for your ability to do that and hold other people in a safe space. So that's how I ended up going through it. I wish I could say that I was much more intentional and purposeful and found it, and I didn't. It was going through that break and realizing, had I had that in place before, I probably wouldn't have broken as hard as I did.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear your words.
Thank you so much, Robin. I knew this will really, really speak to your heart. And Janet, thank you so much. This has been truly a timely, moving, and deeply meaningful conversation. And I cannot wait for us to build on this and do things in the interest of mental health. And thank you so much for making the time in the middle of a holiday weekend to truly have this conversation, because a lot of times people avoid this. And we are shining a light and we are making this okay, because life happens to everybody. We don't need to pretend like each one of us fell from the sky and then a fairy came and waved the wand and everything was perfect. No, life never happens that way. So let's take this opportunity, everybody as a community, and be able to lean into folks and demonstrate how it's done. And when we lean in to people, we are giving them permission to lean back into us. And that's the only way we're going to change this. And let's make a commitment to truly be there for one another and truly hold space and grace for each other, because it's only through that that we're each going to get through our challenges in life without breaking.